All right, guys. So today I'm going to show you how to draw a figure step by step. I'm going to talk a little bit about measuring techniques that you can use to figure out the correct proportions of this figure, which we see right up here. This will be my reference for this drawing. So with this figure, we want to make sure that we get this young man's proportions as correct as we can. And proportions meaning the relationship of size and scale between the different features so that, it doesn't look like his head is too large or doesn't look like his limbs are, going off at angles or with sizes that are unnatural. So guys, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is basic measurement. And it's something that we can do even without a ruler. In fact, frankly, the only tool that you will need is a pencil. Right now, I've got just this little 4B. It will be just fine for my purposes today. However, the best tool is a knitting needle because they are long, they are straight, they're thin, they don't bend very easily, and they've got a nice sharp point very similar to your pencil point. If you've got one of these, then great. If you've got like a shish kebab skewer or some like chopstick or a wooden dowel or something like that, that will work just fine too. But if not, pencil will be completely adequate for our purposes today. So I've got my pencil or my knitting needle. I've got an eraser too, but I'm going to try not to use that as much as I can manage, just so you can see all of the marks that I'm making. Okay, I'm going to be working with somewhat darker pencils, so hopefully that shows up on this pad. But yeah, from here, we're just going to get started with measurement. So the biggest concept with measurement is that you can use a pointed stick or some kind of rod to capture various distances on your reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my phone's camera and see if I can give you an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of measuring this image that we have here. So just hold on one sec and I'll get that started. Okay guys, so I'm going to try to demonstrate this as best as I possibly can with the tools that I have available, but I think I should be able to give you a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so we have this guy, and we need to figure out his measurements more or less. Now, the first thing that we should do is figure out how many times his overall width goes into his overall height. So we can figure out just overall his most basic proportions. So overall width, I'm talking about from, there's my knitting needle, from his hand. This is the most extreme left feature, and his hip, which is his most extreme right feature. That is his width, the distance from here to here. And we're going straight across, straight horizontally. So if I'm talking about his overall height, it would be the distance from the very top of his head to the very bottom of his feet, okay? So with these kind of coordinates as our guide, we're going to see how many times his width fits into his height, okay? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to use my thumb as a slider. I'm going to put the point of my needle right at his hand and I'm going to put my thumb where his hip will line up with it. So remember, the most extreme left and the most extreme right. And I'm just going to kind of slide it vertically. Bear in mind that I'm also holding a camera and trying to line this up for you, so give me a moment. But I think that this is my measurement, okay? Now, my arm that is holding my knitting needle is perfectly straight. My elbow is locked. And since your arm is not going to change sizes anytime soon, that is the measurement, and it will always be the distance from your eyes to the knitting needle. So if we maintain our locked elbow and make sure our thumb is staying at that same spot, then we have locked in that measurement. So next, I'm going to take that measurement and I'm going to see how many times it fits into the overall height. Starting at the bottoms of his feet, I can see that the tip lines up with that cloth that is covering him. So I'm going to slide my thumb up to that spot. I'm going to see that the knitting needle is now right above his chin. So I'm going to come up one more time. And I can see the top of his head kind of cuts off the knitting needle about a third of the way up. So with that knowledge, that measurement of his overall width and his height, his width fits into his height 2 1/3, about. So let's move that back to the big pad and we will transcribe those most important dimensions. Okay, so we're back to the big pad. And so what I'm going to do first is just on my, I guess, drawing area. This might be a little bigger than what you're using, but whatever size you're working with, our area that we're going to be filling in is, going to go from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet and from his right hip to his left hand. First, I'm just going to decide how big I want him to be on my pad. I'm going to say that his head is going to be right up here, and his feet are going to be right down there. So I've put in my extreme top and bottom for this drawing. Now, if I split up this distance into 2 1/3, then I know how wide that width is, his overall width is going to be. So I'm just going to use my knitting needle, and you can use your pencil too, but I'm just going to estimate. Okay, so that'll be 1, that'll be 2, that's 3. So I need the segments a little larger so I can fit 2 1/3 in here. And don't be afraid to kind of press into the paper a little bit to leave yourself a mark of where you need to slide up to. So there's 1, there's 2, and about a third. So that's pretty close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little mark right there. I'm going to make a little mark right there. And now that I have this measurement, I'm just going to slide it over here, make a mark there, and make a mark there. So let me just darken these a little bit for you so you can see them. But my figure will take up this space on my paper. And I could even extend out these boxes a little bit, or extend these lines to form a box. And this is like the bounding box of my drawing, okay? So now that I've got that stuff figured out, the next step is figuring out where all of his body parts belong in this space that I've constructed. So we're gonna go back to the phone camera real quick, so I can show you again on the reference. Okay, so we're looking back at our reference, and I guess the most basic unit of a person, especially one that is standing like this, is the size of their head, usually from the crown of their head to their chin. So what I'm going to do is I am going to measure out that distance and see how many heads tall this figure is, okay? So I've got my knitting needle. I'm going to put my needle between the top of his head and the bottom of his chin. Now bear in mind, if I had this on a piece of paper, this would be easier. And if I wasn't also holding the camera with my other hand, it would be even more easier, maybe a little less shaky. But bear with me, we're going to see how many heads tall this guy is. So from crown of the head to the chin, that is 1. I'm going to slide it down. I see, at least from what I can tell, that the second head space goes from his chin to this area of his back, right where that bend in his back is. So I'm going to use that as my second landmark, third head space from that part of the back. Where's my next landmark? I think it is actually that protruding hip space right there. And that is also our extreme right side. So that could come in handy, knowing that between 2 and 3, in terms of heads, that the bottom of space 3 is that extreme right point. So I'm going to come back from there. It looks like it's lining up pretty good with the top of that knee, that little dip right at the top of the knee. So that is head number 4. Head number 5 comes down from that knee space about mid-calf. So we can see our landmark is that part where the calf starts to bend. And then from there, it is almost perfect. We get a 6th head from that calf to the bottom of the feet. So this person is 6 heads tall. So if we split up our drawing into 6 equal parts, we should be able to line everything up, stack all of those features, and have everything be in the correct proportions. So let's go back to the pad. Okay, so we're back on the pad, and we discovered that this figure is 6 heads top to bottom. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to split up this whole space in half, and I'm going to split each of those spaces into thirds. So we'll get 6 equal parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my trusty knitting needle. You could use your pencil, you could use a ruler for this if you wanted to. I'm going to find my halfway point, which I estimate to be right about there. I'm going to make a little indentation, see if I'm right. Okay, I need a little bit more space up there. So I'm going to slide my thumb, add a little bit more, put another divot. I need a little tiny little bit more. Okay, from there, that should be our halfway point. And I'm going to put a mark there, okay? So next, I'm going to split these up into individual thirds. So we'll have 6 heads overall. And I'm just gonna guess, I think a third is about there. So let's see, I'm gonna line my pencil up with my thumb as a slider, tip at the top, that's 1, 2, and I overshot it. Okay, so I need to make this a little bit less. See if that is my third. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's pretty good. So this will be the point where I erase the marks that I don't need, the ones where I overshot. Okay, so with this being our third, I'm just going to steal this. I'm going to put my thumb right there. I'm going to flip it, line it up, make a mark, line it up, make a mark. I'm kind of stealing these angles. Oh, okay, I guess I overshot a little bit. Yeah, this needs to be a little bit more. There's that. That's better. Okay. Okay, so I have 6 equal sections set up. The next thing I'm going to do is start to kind of block in these features. Figure out where my biggest landmarks are and start filling out the body. Now, if you remember, the hip over here, this protruding point, I want to say that was 1, 2, 3. This should be directly in the center of our composition here. So I'm just going to make a little mark over here, and then that is my hip, and that is generally where it's supposed to be. Now, in terms of the hand, which is the extreme point on the left up here, we can see that, if we lined it up, kind of bisects the face. It kind of cuts the face in half. So we'll say that halfway through this top area, if we bring it over, that should generally be where our hand lives. Okay? Now, when I send lines out that are kind of looking to see what they line up with, that is called a search line. And I will probably be mentioning those search lines as we go, because it's one of the ways that I like to see how things are lining up and stacking up on the body. Okay, so at this point, let's see if we can find some other landmarks that are happening. So I'm going to use that same measurement for the head. And I'm going to see how many times that fits into the overall width of the body. Because we can use that head measurement. We've got it. It's right here. That is how large the head is going to be. Let's compare that with other parts of the body and see where things line up. Okay? So, for example, I'm going to take the measurement of the head, like that, and see how many we can get into the width. That is 1, 2, about 2.5. So yeah, that could be helpful. I'm just going to put one head length at the center. Right about there. Okay, so that, whatever we find that is a head's length away from the corner of that hip, that is going to be at that spot. So let's switch over to the other camera and see what we can find. Okay, so back up here, I'm going to retake my head measurement, which is just about there. And I'm going to rotate. I'm going to see where we end up directly from that hip. And it looks like it is the intersection of the strap and that, I guess, the draped part of that cloth that he's wearing. That corner right in there, I guess, if we follow the line straight down from the belly button, that is where it would end up, which is a pretty good landmark. It's pretty centralized, and we'll be able to use it as a good reference. So we'll switch back to the pad now. Okay, so back on the pad, we are going to kind of mark that spot. This is where our cloth is going to be. Okay, something like that. All right. So I think the next step is let's send out some search lines from that central area, and we'll see if we can place the head. Because once we place the head, then we can kind of put the shoulders together. We can start to fill out the rest of the body from there. So Now I'm not going to switch to the phone camera for this one. I'm just going to go right from my point of view. Hopefully you understand what I mean by making these measurements and using these sight lines. I'm basically just using the straight edge of my knitting needle or my pencil and seeing how things line up. So right now I'm lining up this central area and seeing where it meets the head. And it's looking like it lines up pretty perfectly, or very close, to the part in his hair, which is just about the very top of my composition. So I'm going to send a line straight up from here, and I'm going to make a mark right there. So from here, we can see that we can make a little line for the part of his hair. And then if we look at our reference, there is a line that kind of cuts his face right down the middle, kind of like a center line for his face. And that goes right down to his chin, right there. So I'm going to try to just replicate that angle going from his hair part. Okay. So I've got that center line of the face. It's got an angle so I can show that tilt. From here, we're gonna go over and we can kind of figure out where the shoulder is gonna be, because it seems like the shoulder lines up pretty close to that chin. Okay, so now that we've got this set up, let's start to round out the head a little bit. Okay. So I'm keeping my marks kind of light, just in case I need to fix anything. And you'll also notice that I am drawing using straight lines. I'm not really putting a curve on anything yet. That we can refine as we go. But we want to keep things pretty simple and geometric to start. And then we can refine later. Okay. Okay, so what I'm noticing right off the bat, going back and forth between my drawing and my reference, is that I think I've made the right side of his face a little bit too large to start. So what I'm going to do is kind of shrink that back a little bit. Okay, so if I bring in this face a little bit, saving me some work later. And you know, this kind of drawing should be a process of constant refining. You know, you see something that looks a little weird, and you see what you can do about it in the moment. Because if you're basing measurements off of things that weren't really looking right in the first place, then you're going to be in trouble later. So we do what we can to fix things in that moment. Okay, so we're starting to get the neck coming down now. Now, what I'm doing is I'm comparing the positive and negative shapes that I'm starting to see take shape. With each line, I get a new shape. So I've got a shape where his neck is. I've got a shape that I see in the hair. I've got a multifaceted shape that is making up his face right now. And I'm just going back and forth between my drawing and my reference to make sure that all of the shapes that I'm putting in are as accurate as I can make them. Take a look at where things intersect. Take a look at the angles that things are falling in. Okay, so I'm gonna make this angle. This is his arm coming across his chest. I can see that the elbow lines up, I guess, right before the edge of his other arm. And then remember, I made this little note. This is where his hand is going to meet the edge. So I'm just going to put a mitten on there for now. Now, in terms of sizes of hands, a good way of figuring that out is comparing the size of the hand to the head. How many hands can you fit in the head? And it's looking like my hand line up about right there with my hair. So I'm going to make sure that I make that large enough. Bottom of the hand should more or less line up with the top of the shoulder here. There we go. Then we have his top of his arm, bottom of his arm has a little curve to it. So I'm going to show that with just an angle on my lines, and then his elbow. It looks like the curve is just a slightly to the left of this bend right here. So I'm just going to put that elbow curve in there. And then finish off the arm. Slight bend as we reach the shoulder. So hopefully I didn't make the arm too beefy, but I think it'll be okay. Okay, we're back after a battery change, which I will not let impede me. We will continue. So I think where we left off was in the shoulder area, but now we are going to move down and start building this person's back. So down from the shoulder and up from the hip. And in fact, the hip is where I'm going to start, okay? Because remember, the hip is that most extreme right edge of our composition. So, I don't know, I think it is a good place to start. We've got that concrete point halfway down the body and all the way to the right. So from here, we're going to start by making that angle going up and to the left from the hip. So when we are making marks that are going up or down at angles, there is a certain trick that I like to use. And basically what you're going to do is, take your, well, in this case we have the bounding box, but take your straight edge, your pencil or your knitting needle, just put it completely vertical or horizontal and look at where your angle is going. It's going to form a wedge, okay, with that straight edge. It's going to form kind of like a pizza slice, okay? Now, if you do the same thing to your reference, that is making a straight edge, you can see what that wedge looks like, what that pizza slice is looking like, okay? And if you can judge which slice is larger or smaller, then you'll know what you need to adjust. Okay? We want the same sized slice of pizza in both places. So coming up from the hip here, we want to go into that bend of the spine there. So that bend of the spine, if we remember, was 2 heads down from the very top. So 1, 2. And it's going to end up going right about there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send another search line coming from that bend in the spine and see where it lines up above. See exactly where I can shoot a line down from. And honestly, it is right about here. So I think it was a pretty close estimation. Just going to scooch it over a little bit. That is where that bend of the spine is from where I can see it. And just looking at where it lines up. Next, we'll bring down that shoulder. And then the shoulder blade is this part that is sticking out. And this is going to kind of curve in. And then we have the upper hip, kind of like the top of the pelvis is what is making that little line right there. So I'm going to compare and see how it's looking. Feel like something needs to be fixed over here. So I'll just kind of solidify these lines a little bit. Okay, and that'll work for now, I think. We've got just a little bit of surface detail coming up there. So we'll just include that as a landmark for now. And also, it looks like coming straight down from here is another surface feature. Hopefully this is dark enough so that everyone can see the light marks that I'm making with the pencil. I think overall I'm using a dark enough pencil on the overall form. You should be able to see that. At least I'm hoping. Okay, so next let's get the other side of the torso in. So coming straight down from here and over a little bit to the right, that's where I see the top of his chest poking out. And I'm just going to make another measurement of what I see right here, 2 heads down from the top. Okay, so that'll give me an idea of what belongs in that zone. So I'm making a measurement, and it's looking like just that bend of the elbow is in that general spot. So coming right across, and it looks like that's going to be in this general area. So I'll keep that in mind. So we'll imagine the arm is coming through. We'll bring it down. Then right where I made that mark, that crook of the elbow is going to make another angle. Coming down right about there. And then the hand will begin moving from there, I believe. I might have to make an adjustment later, but it seems okay for the time being. In the meantime, we'll bring the chest down. Add this protrusion that is the rib cage, which is right here. And then angle that down. Okay. From here we can include the other parts of the hand. In this case, make sure that the shapes that you are making when you connect your lines look like the shapes that you see on your reference. So we have kind of like this peak, this roof of the hand that's popping up there. And keep it simple. These references are blocky for a reason. Okay, and then we got a little thumb. That will work for the time being. Okay, so I'm taking a look at my reference and my drawing, and I don't know how it seems to you, but I feel like my drawing might be a little wider than what I'm seeing in the reference. What I'm going to do is just make a line, a search line coming up from the inside hip, and I'm going to see where it lines up on the head. It kind of hits right about here. So I'll do the same thing here, send it down. And yeah, it's looking like I made something a little bit too wide. So I'm just going to fix that real quick. I feel like maybe I could bring it in a little bit over here. And then I believe this area might also be a little bit too large, so we'll bring that in. I'm just kind of shrinking the lines that I've made already. Kind of following those same contours. I get that double line. But we'll just wipe that guy out. And refine it a little bit. Okay. Okay, so we've got both sides of his torso. I'm going to put in those details that we can see on his chest. His belly button lines up with his thumb. And then his abdomen. We've got those small details too. I think I'll bring that up there. Cool. What's next? Okay, so I think next we'll put in his loincloth. At least get that started. We have an idea of where it rests on this flat part of his hip. Right after the bend, and it comes down there. And then it is not very thick. So that works there. And then on this side, same thing. We already have some lines there from previous marks. Kind of fills in that area. It looks like it's riding a little higher here. Yep. Okay. Now, next, let's start bringing in the leg on the right-hand side. We know that this is that hip curve. And we know that this is the top of the kneecap. Okay, so the kneecap, I think we can put that one in first. And it seems to be just slightly to the right and then straight down from this corner of the loincloth. So slightly to the right, straight down, right at the mark that we made. That is 4 heads down from the top. So this is zone, the head number 4. So with this, we can bring a line straight up from that kneecap. And then this is also where the loincloth is resting. And I'll just sketch this in to kind of imply that cloth feeling. Okay, so from there we've got that kneecap. I'm just going to put a line in there as a placeholder for now. And then from this curve, we're going to start to taper it in and down. Now that I see, I think I made a slight error because all of these are kind of stacked together and mine are not so much. And I see what the problem is. Okay, so let's redo this. And this only goes till about there. Because if I line things up with the edge there, it'll go straight up to the shoulder. Okay. Here, straight down. And the kneecap. That's a little closer. Okay, so we've got that kneecap in there. I'll put in the loincloth. Placement's a little bit better. And now I can get a little bit more definition in my lines. It's always good to have a sharp pencil. Gonna add a little bit more weight to some areas now. If you see dark lines on your reference, make sure you add that weight to it. Okay, so next let's continue down this leg. Now this is where things are going to get a little weird. We have a lot of angles that are very precariously stacked on each other. So I want you to just compare how things are looking between your drawing and your reference. So you kind of cobble together these zigzagging angles that we see going down this leg. A good thing to do at this point is figure out where the feet are going to end up. So I'm going to send a straight line, straight search line, coming up from the big toe and seeing where it intersects with things. And it's looking like it will intersect right down from here, right at the corner of the knot of the loincloth. So I'm just going to make a little mark right there. That is where my big toe destination will be. At this point, it's also useful to compare the positive and negative shapes that you're making every time you make these lines. It'll be more apparent once we get this other leg in here, but the shape that is made by the negative space in between the legs will help you adjust your contours. Just don't want this shin to turn into a noodle, that's the thing. I want it to have structure and stability. All right, so that's one side. Let's continue the other side down. This side is a little bit more curved, but we're gonna still try to stick to our straight lines. Because they provide structure. Okay, just doing some refining. I think I made this feature on the front of the shin a little bit too severe, so let's bring that back. Carve it down like you're sculpting. And then we'll get the bottom of the foot. So just a few features for the toes. You don't have to go crazy. We know that there are toes there. And of course the heel is foreshortened behind the foot. Okay, I think I might have to knock back this knee a little bit. Okay, I'm happy with that. That'll be fine. Okay, next is the next leg. So starting from right about here, I see that the hamstring is coming down and making this kind of negative space shape. Between the legs, it looks like a, I don't know, looks like a penguin that's looking up. Or a garden gnome with a tilted hat. However you see that negative shape, try to replicate it. Look at where things line up and intersect. All of those little angles and notches that we made in the first leg, we can use those as landmarks to help us with the second leg. So like this angle right here, I know that there is another angle on the other side of it, almost exactly. And that forms the antecubital, the inside of that knee joint. Okay, it comes down a little bit for the calf. And then using that last head line, which lines up with that calf really nicely, we'll bring it down and get the heel in there. Let's just clean up some of our lines a little bit. Keep your lines singular, not so sketchy and feathery. Try to be deliberate with your mark making, if possible. Okay, I'm going to come down over here. Got an idea for how thick his legs are. In all honesty, I feel like there are some proportionate problems with this, and I feel like it could be that I'm just a little rusty, or it could also be that when I was taking my measurements through the phone camera, I was not taking them as accurately as I could have possibly been, but that's okay. Because overall, this person will look pretty natural. I'm not worried. Okay, now his foot is, I guess, the curve has several angles that are kind of connected as the bottom of the foot rounds out. And we need to make sure that we show the length of that foot compared to the one that is foreshortened. Get those toes in there. And then just take care of those extra lines. Okay, and we got a foot. Now, let's see if I need to make any adjustments. I probably need to slim this calf out a little bit. And this part's a little too round, so I'm just gonna sharpen that up. And just little bits of refining here and there. Okay, and I'm just gonna quickly get this little pedestal that our guy is leaning so casually on. Okay, so overall, not too shabby. I hope this was helpful. Hopefully you watched at least most of it, if not all of it. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully there will be another one of these up for you to see in the near future. So stay tuned. Thanks again.